My name is Peter Blom. I'm 47 years old. Today is the 19th of October, 2004. We're in Grand Central Station, and I am the son of my interviewee.
I am Benjamin Blom, age 79, same date and same location, and I am the father of the interviewee, Peter.
Okay, so I'm gonna start chronologically with some questions on early childhood, which I guess I would define as before you left Holland, up to about, 11 or 12. So, and I just start with a really broad question about, do you have a best memory of childhood and a worst memory of childhood?
Yes, I do. I remember swimming with my father probably at the age of 5, and for the first time seeing a lovely round ass of a woman who attracted me no end. My father, noticing how I was staring, put his hand across my eyes. However, I don't know what he did. In any case, worst memory, yes, I had a terrible fight with my father and threw a stone at him just before I left Holland, age 14.
And you want to talk more about what the genesis of that fight was?
I don't remember, Peter. I honestly don't remember what the content of that fight was. It was pretty severe. And afterwards, I remember my father crying, sitting in the office and crying. So he must have been deeply affected, as was I, obviously.
So,
And then, of course, there are any number of quote-unquote bad memories. My father and mother at times fought bitterly, as we have previously discussed, an ugly kind of a way. They were really not meant for each other, although they stick together.
So that leads well into the next really broad question about anything you want to describe about your relationship with your parents in particular.
I loved my father infinitely, despite all his obvious flaws, and they were severe and intense at times. They were really bad, really ugly, not just bad. One example being that although my mother, as you know, is Orthodox and brought up in that kind of a way, and my father was hysterically, or whatever you want to call it, an atheist. To the nth degree. He was very contemptuous of religion, typical of this 1920 period, and at one point, as a quote-unquote joke, fed my mother pork, in which case, she threw up. That was a kind of thing. One could go on and on and on. I can sit here the whole day and tell you all the rotten things that no doubt he did. Yet, he was a very decent person in a crazy way. He was a very fair-minded person, a very deeply committed person in terms of justice, not only to himself but to everybody around there. And he was a person who when he was wrong, he was willing to admit that he was wrong. He had the integrity to say that I screwed up or I fucked up or whatever words that may have been in Dutch. Really, in that regard. And not only I, but I would say Frey, who he also mishandled horribly, truly adored him. I would say more than I did. I can say I love my father. My mother I liked and respected and so forth, but there was never the intensity of feeling for her that I had for my father, who intellectually was a very challenging person, politically, socially, and so many other ways, and a very courageous person also.
Did you also, was there any mixed feeling with your father in terms of like fear or anger? Or was it
Fear in a strange way, no. Anger at times, certainly, yes. I mean, extreme, bitter anger, as epitomized by that story I just told you of my throwing a stone at him. So there was a lot of that.
okay. And what about your relationship with your siblings? You
Well,
had
I was the youngest, as you know. I mean, there were eight. There were actually 10, of whom 2 died, and I never met them. One at the age of 4 months, so that's almost an infancy, Maurice, and the other one. I mean, no, I'm sorry, Chris, who died, and the other one, Maurice, who died at the age of 6, and who I never met. So there were 8 of us altogether, including myself. And I was by far the youngest. In fact, that was a mistake. I should never have been. Despite everything that happened, obviously, sexual things, were still going on, and there was I. Hey, the mistake. But okay, so I was 4 years younger than my other youngest sibling, Debbie. And as far as Frey is concerned, or David, I mean, I was about like 15 years older, and many of them, like Frey and Chris, moved out of the house. So but I basically had a really good relationship, I would say, with all my siblings except for Debbie. I mean, Debbie is the grand exception from square one. Don't ask me why or how, it just is true.
So there were none of them that you were particularly close to as a child? I'm
Yes.
talking about as a, yeah.
Yes, Chris, I'm sorry, I hit that thing. Chris, I really, really liked. I mean, first of all, she was very, quote unquote, modern and very forthright, and spoke to me about all kinds of, quote unquote, forbidden, sexual subjects and so forth, kid her around. It was I found very exciting and a very attractive person as well. Frey I really liked. However, she was so distant. She was in Amsterdam and, came in on occasion and was the grande dame when she did come in, looking like the grande dame, clothed like the grande dame with the wonderful hats and all the great scarves. I mean, she was a wonderful dresser. So, yes. I really liked Betsy. And Betsy and I got along marvelously, I would say. Anyway, have I answered your question? David is, you also know, I'm mentioning people you know. David is sort of a peculiar and has always been, element in all this. How can I kindly express it? The least exciting, in many ways. Carl, well, the story about that one.
Right, but I'm talking now more about your feelings from when you were, 5, 10 years old, as opposed to what's happened.
Yeah, later on.
Yeah.
I would say, I don't know how much I can remember about my relationship with my siblings at the age of 5 or 6. Later, yes.
Maybe 10.
Yes.
Yeah.
Later, 10, yes.
Yeah.
And basically along the lines of what I said.
Right. And do you have memories of any of your best friends back
Yes.
then? And
Yes.
who were they and what were they like?
Yes. Preferred females. Did have several male friends with whom, also my cousin Maurice would live nearby. Yes, I do. Yeah, I was socially fairly integrated or comfortable or whatever you want to call it, or centered. I mean, whatever.
Any of the friends you want to describe a little more that you have a strong memory of, or is it a little vague at this? No. Okay.
Vague.
Okay.
No, not vague. There was then, and I'm trying to recall as you asked me, I mean, particularly later on, when the Nazis, took power in Germany, and it became very, as you know, we were miles of what then became Nazi Germany in 1933. And I think the schism, if you want to put a fancy schmancy word for it, between Christians and Jews became the more pronounced. And I think I probably, toward the end, gravitated more, felt more comfortable with the small Jewish, community in Winterswijk. Although I'm not sure about that, Peter. I am not sure about this.
Okay. Well, actually, that's a perfect transition to the next section, which is kind of the lead up to how you came to emigrate here and all that. So I thought I'd open that up with just when did you first become aware of anti-Semitism in Holland, and how did it manifest?
In liberal Holland, and whatever have you, it was particularly in a town like that, but I suspect elsewhere. I mean, anti-Semitism was manifest even before Hitler arose. All you had to do was go to school, as I did, run through an alley with a wooden fence on both sides, and there to see scribbled loud and clear, whatever have you, I'll give you in English, Jews, Christ killers, Joden, Christenmoordenaars. And it was scribbled, and the amazing thing about that is a goodly number of nuns and priests and ministers would take the same cut-off or shortcut route that I did, and they would get very excited about pejorative scribblings or graffiti, a penis, whatever, never crude, whatever have you. There, that they would erase, but the anti-Jewish, whatever have you, Christ, killers, I mean, remained magically on there until the weather, finally. So it was almost impossible not to be aware, and that is even in liberal Holland, although I will say that the overwhelming majority of people were very decent. I mean, one did not go around with fear or resentment or hatred or anything even remotely like that. I went with my farmer. If I'm talking too much, stop me. But I went with my father, for example, to the various farms where he bought cattle, and most of those farmers around Winterswijk were very strict Calvinists. I mean, they were super duper, whatever have you, Calvinists, and one was nicer than the other. One made you more welcome. In fact, later on, when the Nazis did occupy Holland, it's they who, more than anyone else, saved Jews, and took them into farms and hit them.
So, but there must have come a time when you started to sense yourself that there was an increase in anti-Jewish feeling.
Yes.
Yes. Can
you
describe
how
God. That manifested? Or
first of all, I mean, once Hitler took over back in 1933, or whatever the exact date may be, I think the end of November of 1933, once that immediately, I mean, banners went across
The border.
the border. Thank you very much. The border. I mean, with loud screaming, Jews not welcomed, and one had no difficulty whatsoever knowing that. And secondly, although the Nazi element in Holland was small, and even in Winterswijk, which is so close to Germany, it was small. But, about 4%, whatever have you, were decidedly Nazis. And unfortunately, many of those were on the upper level. So my teacher one day, shall I tell you the story? I mean, what?
Sure. Yeah.
So one day I took private French lessons from Mr. Kahn, who lived in a private house not far from us. I took the bicycle and went over, and I saw that a lot of people were, watching and waiting down there. And then I noticed that there were white curtains billowing in from the second floor, big with huge red stains. And it turned out that these bunch of hooligans had entered Mr. Kahn, who was a sweet, retired little man, and beaten him to a pulp. I mean, he was hospitalized for any number of a long period of time, and just as an anti-Semitic, act. And my father, this is the thing that I love about him, went to the Orthodox community and tried to organize them. There were about 250, roughly, Jews in the town, a small group, but they were all Orthodox. And he went down there and he tried to persuade them to have a march and to go to the chief of the police and to protest all this because they were not properly investigating. And of course, he was told, look, I mean, let's not rock the boat. Let's not antagonize them, and that was the basic attitude that unfortunately existed within that community. And by the time they woke up to the reality of what was happening, it was too late. About 90% of the Jews of that town were exterminated. I mean, of those who remained behind. So my father, being the political animal that he was from square one, hot, heavy socialist, and all that, and highly successful entrepreneur, to say the least. I mean, it began in 1938, I think, already, sending Chris, Betsy, and David over to America, and then we followed in October of 1939, about 6 months before the Nazis invaded Holland, and in splendor, whatever have you, came here.
Do you remember the decision process that led him to make that decision? Or I would imagine it must have been a family decision that was talked about with your mother and with the siblings. Like, was there?
Yes, I think that the decisive factor in that was the famous and renowned, horrible, Kristallnacht. Keeping in mind that was 1938, I think, November 1938, right? When whole loads of German Jews fled across the border and came into our house. I mean, it became so manifest. Aside from all the banners and everything else that was going on, it became so apparent that my father said, let's go and pick ourselves up and, well, at least you go or save part of it or do something while, the going was good. Right. And, of course, he had the means to do that. As you know, Mother never worked, a stitch in her life from what he was able to, there it is.
And was there any disagreement, or did the whole family pretty much?
No, I don't think there was. No, I don't remember there being any, hot and heavy. I mean, obviously there was sadness. There was a lot of attachment. I mean, on my father's side, the Bloms probably go back 300-400 years. I mean, probably to the Spanish and Portuguese expulsion. So it's a long-rooted history and very profoundly culturally and so forth attuned to everything. But, nonetheless, I think my mother too. I mean, my mother was very integrated and very much liked and loved and respected by the school committees and others. I mean, she was a very outspoken person.
And how did you feel when you first heard that you were going to be moving to America?
I loved it.
I mean, before
Instantly.
Before you got here,
Yes.
when you were still in Holland, you
Yes.
loved the idea of it.
Absolutely. I tell you why. I love cities. Whenever my father took me to any city, I was in my element. I absolutely loved cities. Maybe as a reaction of having come from an agrarian little community, but that's the way it is. And so when I came to New York, it was like a duck coming to water. I mean, I was just absolutely, I went to Union Square. I think the second day I was here, I went to Union Square not knowing one word of English and participated or listened to all the political discussions, hot and heavy discussions that were going on back there. I mean, it was wonderful. I remember, the Communist Party set up. It was just at the time of the Ribbentrop, whatever have you, and the Hitler Pact. The Communist Party set up they stood on a ladder. Yes, they stood on a ladder on the corner of Ocean and Church Avenue. And we're explaining away why this horrible pact was supposedly, a gift to humankind. And I remember my first participation, whatever have you, not knowing a word, I just stood there and I kept on saying boo, boo, boo. That's the only thing that I could say. But anyway, so I just absolutely adored the whole experience. I mean, I just absolutely loved it from square one. There was never any ambiguity.
And how was it for you going to school here? Can you describe going to, because you started in high school, right?
No, I did not start in high school. No, in fact, I started in grammar school, which was, of course, ridiculous because by that time I was 14 and I had already had, a year of high school in Holland. So, but they failed and probably with due course that the thing to do, because I didn't know the language, is to put me in with the kids, with the younger children. And that worked out just fine. And then from there I went to Erasmus in Brooklyn.
And how did you like that?
Loved it.
Did you feel accepted as a foreigner? Was there any issue with that?
Yes, no. Yes, no. It's funny that you're asking me because I just was telling your mother, if I have you, my wife, your mother, this story, talking about anti-Semitism, which really should not be the only focus of what we're talking about because there's so much more to it. But, at that point, in 1939, there was the America First and Lindbergh and all the rest of stuff like that. There was a tremendous amount of very open, blatant anti-Semitism in this country. And I remember walking across Ocean Avenue to see my friend and a doorman noting my accent, said, "Oh, another one of these fucking Jews coming into this country." I mean, out loud with everybody standing there, something that is unimaginable today. Can you imagine a doorman, I mean, ours or anybody else's, making they wouldn't last a day. It wouldn't last a minute. But, them were the days.
And did you make good friends in high school?
Yes.
Do you remember anything?
Yes, Wally, I remember. I remember one other one. Yes, there were about 3 or 4 that I think I was very close to, or yes.
Any of them that you want to describe a little more, or?
No, I would say they fitted, sort of a stereotypical 15, 16, talking about girls and sports and going to the park and running around. I mean, the usual sort of thing.
Right.
Nothing.
Okay. Okay. Wanted now to talk a little bit about your joining the military and the process, that process, and start with just when and how did you make the decision to volunteer?
Well, I was 17 and subject to the draft, the American draft, which, however, would not take me until I was 18. And I was very unhappy about that because I really wanted to go and, quote unquote, fight in the Nazis. And so the way out was to get permission from the U.S. Army to go and join the Free Dutch up in Canada, part of the either first or second Canadian Army, or something like that, up in London, Ontario. Anyway, I joined them. It was the English-speaking contingent or battalion or whatever have you of the Dutch Army. Virtually everybody there came from, I don't know, Wisconsin or South Africa or wherever, all English, speaking. So, and then in turn we were part of the Canadian Army.
Gotcha. Okay. And what are your strongest memories from your time in the military?
Oh, that would consume whatever time. Anyway, where to begin, where to end? I don't even know where to begin to end that one.
Do you want to describe the time when you were wounded? What?
Yeah, I was, wounded. I mean, I'm a shrapnel in my face, whatever have you. Probably a grenade or somebody threw something, whatever have. But the peculiar thing of the whole thing was that I wasn't even aware of it. And again, my friend next to me said, "Ben, do you know that you're bleeding?" I said, "Oh, is that so?"
Where were you when this happened? Can you describe the scene?
We were in the countryside. The Germans were maybe 100 feet away or 200, some X amount of time away.
What country?
Holland. Yes, South Holland, right. That's before Nijmegen and the famous bridge incident, or the infamous bridge incident. Anyway, and then my face began to swell up, and then they took me by plane to Brussels, and I got one of the earliest penicillin shots, which instantly cleared the thing up. And I had been slated for 3 weeks recuperation. I recuperated in about 5 days and spent the rest of the time in a Brussels whorehouse. Having a marvelous time of it all. So, there it is.
You literally stayed there.
Yes, physically stayed there. Yes. They were extremely lax.
Right. Yeah.
I think yes. I could. You're asking? Yes. I must have because I stayed overnight. Yes, I must have. Yeah, I presume that I do not remember whether I had to check in. But there it is. But anyway, there are also unhappy and resentful memories about the military related to the whole Dutch thing. To get into that, I don't know.
How long were you in altogether?
I would say 2 years.
2 years. Starting
Yes.
in 43, 42?
40, let me see, 43, I believe, yes.
And do you remember being afraid? How did you feel?
No. Honestly, no. More, I mean, I was so what's the word?
Passionate.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, about the fight against the Nazis. Without even well before the truth and the horror of the show was revealed to the world. I mean, I knew enough, and I knew that my father, despite the phony Red Cross telegram that we got, did not die of a heart attack, but was killed. And I knew that loads and loads of others were equally killed. I had no, well, I wouldn't say I had no illusions. That's not true, but because the full extent of this horror didn't really become clear until these camps were liberated by, and pictures and everything else were revealed. But I knew enough.
And do you remember either wounding or killing anybody
Yes,
yourself?
I killed. Yes, in fact, I mercy killed a German soldier who was dying and shot him in the head.
How did you feel about that?
I don't know, mixed. Not to be forgotten. I try not to remember, but on the other hand, he was truly, just beyond the beyond, and there was no way out of this thing. So But I also remember being very cruel with some of the Germans that we took prisoner. I say cruel verbally, not physically. I mean, taunting them and saying, "Ich bin ein Jude," and stuff like that.
Right.
So there was a lot of anger and resentment and whatever have you there. So when you ask, was I fearful? I mean, it's stupid to say I'm not fearful. Obviously, when things are happening, I mean, it is dumb to say. Somebody which actually did happen, throw a grenade, and I cover myself by going to the ground. I mean, I can't call that a pleasant experience. I mean, my God, shall we say?
And besides this guy that you mercy killed, were there others that you have a clear recall of?
No.
Okay.
No, none. Not a one. Probably did.
And do you feel that your time in the military changed you in some way?
Not really. No, I didn't feel. It was an experience, obviously a very intense experience. But I can't say that I emerged a different person. I was already at the age of 14. I mean, thanks to my father, very, very, from eight on, intellectually, politically involved. There's partly admiration. I mean, whatever have you. My father spoke to me about things which I didn't have the vaguest idea what the hell he was talking about. In one way, like Spinoza, for example, he would read something by Spinoza or Einstein or somebody else, get very excited, and while we're going down there, talk to me, and 75% probably got lost, but strangely, at 15 or whatever percent it may be, it doesn't matter, that was present, became a source of inspiration.
Right.
And I listened to Hitler, for example. Oh, are we through? I listened to Hitler, for example, with my ear glued to the crackling Philips radio set. And even though I didn't know German, certainly not fluently, I mean, and this is and taking notes as I went along. This is the age of 8 or 10, I don't know, some very early. So, I came from that kind of a background. And so the Army did not make that critical a change.
Okay, start to move to when you came back to New York after that. And I think I want to start with things about Randy, about my mother and your wife.
Right.
Well, first of all, did you have any serious relationships before you met Randy?
Yes. Yes, I was engaged to a young woman in England. Or she thought she was engaged. In fact, her mother wrote, and so it was very sad. She's a very lovely person, but obviously she was never meant for me. I had an intense relationship in Holland with Louise. A married woman with 2 children, a French person with whom I went across the border and brought her to Neuilly in Paris. Very rich family.
This is while you were in the military.
In the military, and though it was in The Hague, I had a very intense relationship with her. Yes. Prior to that, I had a matter of fact, your mother met her. Before I went in the Army, I had a relationship with a woman in New York. Very pleasant, very nice. One day we bumped into, she and I, in Brooklyn, said hello. She recognized me. I didn't recognize her, but she recognized me and said hello, whatever have you. There we are.
Do you remember her name?
No, she was happily married, had a number of children. Everything was just fine.
And do you want to talk more about Louise or how you met or what that was about?
Well, right. I mean, Louise I met through her husband, strangely. I was among the earliest ones to liberate The Hague. There were very few of us, and by that time the Nazis were on the run. So when I say liberated, don't have any image of today's. Forget it. I mean, the population was 100% with us. Obviously, the Nazis had given up the thing. So when I say we liberated The Hague, I mean what it means is that we walked in, and that's it. There was never a shot fired or near a shot fired. So the situation was horrible. I mean, very economically and otherwise, and people were almost starving at that particular point. And I met her husband, and he wanted to sell me whatever it was he wanted to sell me. He was desperate. And we got to talk and so forth and so on. And he invited me over to his house, and I met Louise, not having the vaguest notion that anything would ever transpire. But slowly but surely it did.
And you said you actually went over the border with her?
Yes, to both Belgium. I took her to her home in Neuilly, which is a very, very richy suburb of Paris. Still is. Her family were bankers, probably cooperated with the Nazis. No, they probably did. They really did. So many of them did.
Right. But it sounds like there was no expectation that it was anything beyond an affair with a married woman.
Right.
Yeah.
This marriage was a total mismatch. And so, and Louise and I just took to each other, we just did.
And what about this woman in England? Do you want to say anything more about that?
Winifred? She's a lovely person. Really a very nice person.
This was also during the war?
During the war, yes. This was in Wolverhampton in England when we were stationed there. We went from London, Ontario, was shipped to Wolverhampton and quartered there until Normandy. I entered Normandy about 10 days after the initial invasion and fought in the first time near Caen, and then went in the infantry fighting on from Caen through Belgium to Holland, and then ultimately ended up, The Hague was the last step in all that.
So anything more about, I'm sorry, I forgot her name again.
Louise.
No, the woman in England. Winifred.
No, except that we got a very sad letter. I mean, a very, very pathetic and very letter from the mother. Apparently, Winifred had not found anyone, and she wanted to know why I had not, carried through, and dot. It was awkward. It was unpleasant. It was, it just wasn't meant to be.
Right.
I
So,
mean, Louise was different, but I mean, it was impossible. I would have, she was twice my age, I think, or nearly. Anyway, there was a significant age discrepancy, but we were absolutely nuts for each other and loved each other and so forth.
so do you want to describe now how and when you first met Randy?
Yes, yes, in a bookstore in Milton Applebaum's Arcadia Bookshop, 79 Fourth Avenue. There she was, in a white sweater, looking absolutely gorgeous, enticing. I mean, I knew why I needed. She was the only one there. I mean, Milton was nowhere to be found. She was the only person there. And, the more we talked and the more we communicated and the more we saw of each other, obviously the more we liked each other. And we started going out and stuff like that. And it just evolved.
And how quickly after you met her did you start to feel like this was the one?
Probably, I don't know. I mean, I would say maybe 2 or 3 months. I probably proposed to her in 6 months. I mean, I'm giving you approximations right now. We were married, within the year.
Within a year of when you met?
Right.
And do you want to describe how you proposed to her? What?
Can't remember. For the life of me, Peter, good question, but for the life of me, I just think I have a crazy memory of walking along and talking to her on the street and saying at that one point, well, I'll make pancakes for whatever have you. Won't we? I don't know, some crazy thing like that. It was not on my knees. It was not a formal thing. I did not go to her grandmother, Steinberg, or anything like that. Part of the family, Frida Steinberg, was very upset about this thing because I was making so little money in the bookstore and I had so little money that she said, what is a gorgeous, a beautiful woman like you doing with this schmuck? Oh, she probably didn't say it that way, but because she had been connected. I mean, she was really very attractive, and probably physically at that particular point could have done much better. Now, what happened beyond that is another story again. But initially, certainly, there was a tremendous, unhappiness in part of the family, not with Annette's grandmother, and not with Oscar and Ida, who you know, and not with others. So it was a mixed picture.
And do you want to describe the wedding a little bit?
Oh, it was glorious. Absolutely. The most wonderful wedding I've ever gone to. Truly. And I'm not kidding. It was so small. It was so intimate. It was, everybody knew each other, whatever have you. It was in Grandma Steinberg's home. And it was very, and the rabbi spoke very personally to her, knew her well, and really, it was really very on a personal level. It was very, wonderful, even though it was, by today's standards, idiotically, mini.
And you want to talk a little bit now about like the first earliest years of your marriage. Did you were there particular problems that should we cut it now?
Maybe a couple more minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
So maybe make this the last question. Yeah, were there particular problems that you encountered in those early years, or
Um, I mean, I have to divide it up into personal problems or personal issues. I mean, for example, I think we made the early years were economic struggling years. I mean, first of all, because when I married, I was still working for Katie for next to nothing. Eventually, I moved over to Weiser, who paid me slightly more than nothing. And then when I went on my own, and that became successful. But the more successful it became, I mean, the more money it would absorb. In other words, all the money was plowed back into the business. And so this was an endless chain whereby theoretically on paper we were making money, but we didn't have enough money to pay for the postage to send the packages out. I mean, something ridiculous like that. So there was the economic aspect of it. I mean, in a crazy way, we were very comfortable. In another way, we were very strapped, depending upon how you look at it.
and you were working together right from the beginning?
In the beginning, yes, we were working together. I think Annette took a separate job, though. I mean, in a stamp company. In fact, she did work. I'm not quite sure, Peter, whether her working with A&B Booksellers took place from the beginning on. I think I was on my own for a while. Then ultimately, she was always involved in some capacity, even after work, so to say.
And what about on the personal level in those early years?
That, I think, I mean, I really, we really liked each other. We continued to enjoy each other. But basically, we had a good marriage. You want to get down to the bottom line, it worked.
Okay. Is that a good place to probably?
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.